actually joined Workday around about the time they went public. I joined Slack. I was the first CIO at Slack about 18 months prior to them going public. And I joined Samsara around about the same time, about 18 months prior to them going public. So at this point, I feel like I could write a book about what does it mean to take a company public and grow to large enterprise and kind of all of that implies. Maybe one day I will. For me, it is the most essential ingredient in the role that we have. And I've seen that again over the companies that I've worked for, a great grounding in architecture and really complex architecture. How do you actually create a culture that enables employees to experiment and look at problems differently, come in with diverse perspectives?
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workado, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. All right, Stephen. So it's like with really great pleasure to have you here on the podcast. So for the audience, maybe this is a reunion, all right? So back in 2019, March of 2019 to precise. So we're looking like over 5 years back. We had this conversation in a actually pretty nice restaurant in San Francisco in front of 30, 40 CIOs. Back then, you were at Slack. You were the CIO of Slack. Slack was the coolest thing at that time, that was for sure. So everyone came for you. I mean, I don't think they came for Workado, but very fond memories. You guys had been at Slack a customer for almost roughly 2 years at that point. So dating back to 2017 is really early days of Workado, and we did this growth journey together. It really influenced Workado as a company. I mean, there's a lot of capabilities that our governance, for example, is pretty much built from the experience at Slack. Super excited and to kind of catch up and see what's happening now. And I'm afraid to say, but it's almost 4 years that you're at Samsara now. So it is time. It is time to catch up for sure. But I'm just curious, maybe catch us up a little bit. You're that expert in rocket ship high growth companies. Tell us, even before Slack, there was Workday, right? So you did Workday and then Slack and then Samsara. Maybe you can tell the audience a little bit, how that experience was and maybe how it was different or maybe how it was the same. I think that would be a great place to start.
It's almost like getting the band back together, so to speak, because I know we did a lot of work together at Slack. And actually, if you think about my background, maybe in answer to your question, I actually joined Workday around about the time they went public. I joined Slack. I was the first CIO at Slack about 18 months prior to them going public. And I joined Samsara around about the same time, about 18 months prior to them going public. So at this point, I feel like I could write a book about what does it mean to, take a company public and grow to large enterprise and kind of all of that implies. Maybe one day I will.
I have a feeling the audience is wondering now, where are you going next? So they can cash in on your good experience here. It's impressive, right. Really impressive.
I've been very fortunate in those choices, and certainly they've been great learning experiences, as you could imagine, over the course of time. And to your point, there are a lot of similarities across those three companies. I mean, they're similar in the sense that they were indeed, as you said, rocket ships, really fast-paced growth companies. They had great products and great product market fit, and they were going through massive scale, and that's certainly the case with Samsara today, as we're still kind of living through this massive scale, and similar in terms of evolution of their architecture as well. It's kind of interesting. early on in a company's existence, systems are created and owned by the business functions, right? And they just kind of evolve organically over time. And they implement these systems really out of necessity, right? They have to have something to kind of get their work done. And that works to a certain point, but it creates a very disconnected architecture where systems and functions just don't talk well together, and there's no data strategy per se, which is probably fine when you're super small. When you get to a certain size, normally the forcing function actually is when a company is looking to go public. You need a set of systems and a holistic architecture that will actually enable you to operate as a public company and actually allow you to scale. And that's when companies start to think about hiring a professional CIO, if I could use that term, to kind of help them build an organization that creates that connected architecture. And that was certainly the case at Workday early on, and at Slack, and again, most recently at Samsara as well. And then maybe the flip side of your question, I think about the main differences. And there's always nuances, of course, around things like company culture. Every company has its own kind of unique culture. I think the biggest difference at Samsara, and when compared to like a Workday or a Slack, is that we're not just a software business, we're also a hardware business as well. And so I get to worry about things like the global supply chain challenges that we've had over the last several years. But we're really building hardware and software. We're building IoT devices, which we deploy broadly across our 20,000 customers. And then we use those kind of at the edge of the network, if you like, to gather data and bring that back into our software platform, really to drive value for our customers. And also the last thing I would say is our customers are very different at Samsara. We're really in this physical operations space. And these are the infrastructure industries that essentially run the global economy, including things like energy, utilities, and transportation and logistics and construction. We even have things like agriculture in there as well. And in actual fact, physical operations industries make up about 40% of the global GDP. It's staggering, really, when you think about it. It's a massive market that we're talking about, Markus. But those are some of the similarities, I suppose, and the differences that I've seen over the course of time.
Yeah. No, it's actually really interesting. So you've evolved somewhat in a similar fashion as Workato has evolved. So going back to 2019, in that room, these 30-odd CIOs, I think they were all from digital native companies from the Bay Area. So they were kind of they were actually just looking, how are you doing this at Slack, right? Kind of colleagues of yours. And then you moved on to Samsara, working with more old school kind of companies, and so has Workato, to be honest. I mean, that movement of the low code, the modern integration and automation kind of platform has really moved from the Bay Area to the world, really. We have now huge, like $20 billion utility or energy exploration companies in Australia, or like the German logistics, the logistics part of the German railway. Or what do we have? Like we just got like a very, very big fashion retailer as a customer. NASDAQ is a customer. So these are all more kind of, I would say, traditional companies. Mm-hmm. And I think you might have decoded a little bit something here for me. It seems like what you described was that when you come in, this seems to be like your gig, is you're bringing structure to an organization that's now taking off. So you're in a way that the Uber architect as the CIO. Maybe there wasn't an architect before, so now you're bringing this discipline and probably hiring the people. When we go as Workato to these traditional companies, it tends to be the enterprise architect that gets excited about a Workato. And frankly, I would also say, like, if they don't have a strong architecture discipline in that company, often Workato doesn't really prosper too well, if that makes sense. Actually, let's talk about architecture. I mean, you made that point back then in 2019. I think you made the point when you talked to eWeek about Samsara. and so on. Also curious what you see with the Samsara customers. I don't know if you were talking to any architects there. What if you want to? If you're a CIO out there, if you're an IT leader out there, you want to scale IT. How important, how essential is architecture in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is the most essential ingredient in the role that we have, and I've seen that again over the companies that I've worked for. I came from a large organization prior to Workday. I worked at Cisco, and actually Cisco gave me a great grounding in architecture and really complex architecture. We certainly see very complex architecture within our customer base. If you think about our customers, many of them have been around for 50 or 100 years, right? They have very complex operations. And we're not only dealing with, systems that are antiquated and they've been kind of underserved from a technology standpoint, many manual processes, kind of similar to your describing about the evolution of Workado. And so really it's about, moving them to the cloud, digitizing their business and modernizing their business. And a large portion of that is about architecture. Now, I will say that typically we're selling into operations leaders because they're dealing with these kind of large physical operations challenges versus IT leaders in general. But I think about our own business. I mean, the core ingredient, especially for these fast-paced organizations, is investing in a solid architecture. We live in a world where we have a naturally demand-driven business within IT, right? We're constantly being asked from a business perspective to do the latest project of choice that may or may not have value associated with it, or implement the latest system of choice. But we really need to spend the time as an IT organization to step back and ensure that we're building an enterprise architecture that will bring all of that together in a set of end-to-end processes and end-to-end interactions and end-to-end user experiences that actually make sense to run your business, right? And by the way, the CIO and the IT organization is the only organization within the company that has that view. I like to think of it as kind of like the connected tissue of an organization, right? It's almost like the brain, the intelligence or the brain of an organization. You have this unique perspective because you're looking across every single function within the organization. You see what they do well, you see what their opportunities are, but you need to take that and figure out how do you actually create and bring them together in this architecture that really truly is end to end. And actually, that's where Workado has been a huge enabler in the companies I've been at, especially at Slack. And now we love Workado so much, we're a repeat customer. We just signed a deal a few months ago to bring Workado back. So when we talk about getting the band back together, I'm looking forward to working more closely with you moving forward again, Markus. It's going to be great. But to me, it gives us that ability to almost like democratize. We talk about this, I know we've talked about this in the past, democratize workflow automation and integration that actually allows you to get to the architecture you need. And I think about these, people talk about this sort of microservices and loosely coupled architecture to be able to support scale and also agility. You don't want to lose your agile edge as you grow as a company. And that's typically the curse of a large company, right? You go from small, you're fast growing, you get to $1 billion or more as a business, and you discover that your processes aren't really working for you, and they start to really slow you down, right? And so, you need to have that kind of architecture discipline, microservices architecture, and an ability to bring all of those microservices together in an agile fashion to enable the business to keep up with the rate and pace of change that's going on in the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's really interesting. Again, I think it boils down to, again, these traditional companies, right? I think you're really helping me here. The thing is, what we're seeing, I think some of them have probably lived in that world of, moving slowly, not being agile, that maybe they're already forgotten what that could be like. And then it gets really hard, right? Because you can't imagine it. The other thing is, I mean, you mentioned automation, you mentioned low code and so on as an enabler. Some of these people, I don't know if you see this with the Samsara customers, some of them are almost a little afraid of that. I don't know, what is it? They wonder, is low code, does that mean it's really only for simple stuff. I mean, maybe they don't have the imagination how they could really speed it up. Maybe they're comfortable in the way they operate. I don't know what it is. Do you see some of this? I mean, I guess you got to have an appetite to really change and transform and so on.
Yeah, and the biggest thing for us, and we see this a lot in our Samsara customer base, based on the customers that we have are described in the physical operations world. But if you think about our whole focus at Samsara, it's really about connecting the world of physical operations, right, and moving them to the cloud and modernizing their business. And we kind of touched on that before. And many of these companies are they're somewhat stuck in the way they have done business in the past. And I think the biggest way to break through that is to show them the art of the possible. Actually, we find that giving them a free trial of the capability is a really effective way for them actually to see the value. Let them run it for a month or two. Let them see the value of gathering all of the data that they have across their operations. And we talk about the fact that we're an IoT company, so we deploy all these IoT devices. But really, we're a big data and insights company, right? IoT is kind of a means to an end. And we gather all that data. We're talking about 9 trillion data points we gathered last year alone from across our customer base. So we have a lot of intelligence about how well our customers are doing within their operations. It's almost like someone switches a light on when you display that in the platform to the customer, and all of a sudden they can see things, that the bottlenecks that they've had in the past, areas that they could do things like improve efficiency of their fuel efficiency. They can reduce safety concerns within the organization. Sustainability is another huge area that they're looking to drive. It's a huge agenda for most organizations nowadays. And then just look at the overall sort of meta efficiency of the operations as a whole. And to me, that's the biggest sort of lever, is when they actually see it in the flesh. And it's hard to your point, to pitch the architecture for architecture's sake, right? It's easier perhaps for IT folks or maybe enterprise architects. But when you're talking to business leaders and operations leaders, they really want to see the output and the value. And I think the best way is really to get in there and actually show them how they can experience that value firsthand.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you kind of saw the book here, the New Automation Mindset. One of the chapters is on the growth mindset, right? So process mindset, growth mindset, scale mindset. We talked a little bit scale mindset, with low code and those things. We'll get to that later. But with Samsara, it almost feels to me like you're bringing growth mindset to your customers. You're kind of showing it because I think for me, growth mindset is a little bit about, hey, I have this data. Maybe I need to capture it first. You're helping with this. But if I have that data, and then obviously, there'll be the conversation about AI and generative AI and so on. Now, what can I do? How can I not just automate my business in a robotic sense, just do what I've always done just now without people, but how can I just fundamentally change the way I operate, just fundamentally get more efficient, just like what Amazon did. Like they weren't like putting robots into a store. They said like, hey, what if there was a website? Completely different new model. But it seems like you guys are helping your customers just get a whole new growth mindset. Is that a fair way to look at it?
Yeah, certainly, and I love the book, by the way, and we can certainly talk more about that as I'm sure we will. But to me, I think about growth mindset, and the way it describes it in the book is it's really about innovation and scaling automation, right? And that's essentially what we're in the business of doing for these physical operations companies. And if you think about our mission, it's about driving efficiency, safety, and sustainability for those customers. So you think about those business outcomes through that automation. But to me, again, you put that in context of the growth mindset, it's all about looking at a problem differently. And oftentimes customers will enter into a Samsara engagement and they will expect to get certain outcomes. But as they get into it, they see the data, they get the insights, they get all kinds of unexpected benefits, right? Unintended benefits, which are great consequences from actually implementing the platform. And I'll give you a couple of examples. I just got off of 2 customer calls recently, which were, kind of mind-bending a bit, I will say. DHL is actually one of our largest customers, and you'll know DHL. As you're European, of course, Markus.
I've been there. I visited them in Bonn. Yes, I know that.
Fantastic. And you think about that company, and again, the logistics associated with the business that they're in from a global perspective, and they're talking about 2 billion or something ridiculous like that parcels that they deliver annually. And they keep to their SLAs associated with those parcels, which again is just incredible. If you think about scale, you talk about the scale mindset. I mean, they have that in spades. And again, since adopting our AI solutions and our platform, from a safety standpoint, they've seen something like a 27 or 28% reduction in accidents, right? And also a 50% reduction in related costs. So you think about that again, you think about driving efficiency, sustainability, and safety. Safety is a huge area of focus for these physical companies, right? They're working in job sites where they need to ensure that their employees are really safe, right? And there's implications, there's liabilities associated with that. So you're talking about a 50% reduction in annual costs associated with that on a scale of a company like DHL. It's massive. And again, the original DHL engagement was really about driving efficiency. And all of a sudden, when you implement the platform, you get the data and the insights, you start to look at the problem differently. There's all these additional benefits that you can start to derive. Again, like turning the lights on, and you can actually see where the challenges are within your business and the opportunities are for you to actually go after. So to me, again, it's looking at innovative ways that we can think about problems differently. Interestingly enough, one of our core values is a growth mindset at Samsara for our employees. Okay. So, and as much as anything else, it's about culture, right? How do you actually create a culture that enables employees to experiment and look at problems differently, come in with diverse perspectives? But we really take that seriously in the talent that we select and the culture that we're trying to create within the company.
So that makes me think actually of Slack, and makes me think of another chapter in the book about, the scale mindset. And scale is not just about, how many people are involved, but I think there's one very important dimension of scale, which is like, how do I scale across business and IT? All right. If you go back to when we talked in 2019, I remember like a huge deal was the term business technology. Everyone was talking about it. Cloud had kind of created this environment where actually there was less infrastructure to deal with. I mean, there still is some infrastructure, but less so for IT in a digital native company. And so that interaction with the business, the operations people, became more and more important. And so you mentioned also that connective tissue that the CIO has across the whole company became more and more of a playing field. So I wonder, if you go back to the Slack days, so the one thing that sticks in my mind is your order to cash process that you did. Yep. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but at one of our conferences, we actually had Monica, who was like the kind of architect in a way, right? And then there were 2 other people, I forget their names, I'm afraid, but there was the operations people on the order management side, or the person who was order operations, and then the person who was finance operations. And if you think about it, this is kind of like the key people for order to cash. But they were all 3 of them just presenting together with their different mindsets. And I think it really showed nicely how they had grown together. Where I wonder, like in many traditional companies, I don't think we're at that point yet. I'm just curious what your take on is and how important that is to scale IT and to really fully absorb technology in an enterprise.
Yeah, and it's a great point. And that is the whole shift of IT to business technology, as you touched on there. I know we talked a lot about that when I was at Slack. Certainly, we went through a transition from IT to business technology. We've done a very similar thing at Samsara as well. And really for us, it's about bringing IT kind of, taking away from the sort of traditional shackles of IT, is like I like to put it, as being the plumbers, like the guys who are in the back office, responsible for the infrastructure and the ERP systems and things of that nature. We do that for sure, and that's exceptionally important. Those are almost like the utilities that run the company. But we do much more than that in a business technology world. And it's really stepping into this role around orienting yourself as a CIO and also your team as a business driver, right? And a business leader, right? So really getting an in-depth understanding of the business and being perceived as a business leader around the executive table. That gives you a strong seat at the executive table. But then the power of being able to actually marry that with your technical experience, your architecture experience to enable the organization, but really emphasizing business outcomes as the important part of that, I think becomes really important. And now if I think about our world at Samsara, we're essentially two in a box for all of the functions that we engage with around the way we're organized. We have, executives or VPs within the business technology organization that engage with each of the different functions, whether it's sales or customer success or finance or supply chain. And they are really two in a box. They report into the function of supply chain or finance or sales, but they solid line into the IT function. And their main goal is, from an IT perspective, is how do we promote that architecture that will allow us to scale and keep our agile edge as we grow, whilst also driving business outcomes within the functions themselves. So that's kind of the way I see it and the shift. We're also in the process right now of actually moving to a product operating model from an IT perspective, where we're introducing product managers. So in any R&D organization, I'm sure this is the case at Workado, where you have product managers who are really responsible for the sustenance and the maintenance and the success of each of your individual product lines. They're looking out into the market, they're looking at competitors, they're looking at, what product market fit looks like, what customer needs are. And we can take that kind of as an analogy and apply it internally from an IT perspective as well. Internal customers within each of the functions, but really what does great look like? How can we understand best in class in the market and bring that to bear in the products we're driving and ensure that we're building a product roadmap, which is more strategic in nature. It really is meeting those company objectives as we move forward. And then how do you actually stitch that together again in a modern architecture that's going to support your needs moving forward? And again, that's where, platforms like Workado come into play.
That's interesting. I mean, product management is kind of like, this is what I used to do for all my career. At Workado, it switched a little bit. So that was the first time where, it was more on the customer facing side and strategy side and so on. But yeah, no, totally. I mean, look, the whole agile movement, I think that was, had to do with the PMs and the engineers working closely together in agile teams. And bringing that to IT, I think that's makes total sense. Where do you think we are? If you kind of like, I mean, you said you're doing this at Samsara. We're doing this at Workado as well. But then, there's the digital natives in the Bay Area, and then there's more concentric circles around that, and then you're seeing these physical companies out there. Where do you, from what you see, where do we are as IT leaders, worldwide in that movement to more business technology and to like a product mindset and so on? I feel we're not fully there yet, is my sense.
Yeah, no, we're certainly not fully there. I think the good news is, we'll start with the good news, is I think there's a general understanding around what the evolution should look like, right, over the course of time. I think about the IT maturity curve over the course of time, which is kind of my mental frame around how IT organizations evolve. And this is what I've seen over the course of my career. You kind of start out in this kind of enhancements, demand-driven business where you're driving projects, and you do one project, you move on to the next thing, and you're doing a lot of support and maintenance, right? And that's the sort of traditional IT role. I think then you evolve into this kind of operational excellence state where you are really excellent. You excel at operational excellence, which is super important for a company and super important for scale. It's almost like table stakes. But ultimately, we want to be in this position where we have customer-facing responsibility and also product-oriented work, right? So we talk about agile and things of that nature. We've been in the agile mode for quite some time, certainly across Slack and also Samsara. But really getting into that product management mindset, as you said, it's preaching to the choir, talking to someone who grew up in the product mindset.
I think I've actually put a LinkedIn post about this, about how IT and CPO and so on, CIO and CPO, how there's a lot of kind of convergence happening. Yeah. So
exactly.
I'm with you. I'm with you.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. And so I think there's a recognition that is the direction. But people, if you were to plot yourself on a scale, depending on which company you're in, people kind of play up and down that scale, right? And that's where I think, the first acknowledgement that you have a problem is actually seeing it in the flesh, right? So people do introspection, they understand where they are on that curve. That's the first major step that will allow you to then move forward and take action. So I think generally within the IT industry, there's a recognition that that's where they need to move to, right? Customer-facing work and product-oriented mindset. Again, I think you'll find more of that up and to the right in the Bay Area. And then it starts to, dilute a bit as you move out from there. But again, it's organizations like Workado, organizations like Samsara in the industry that we're in, that are really making a difference in that regard. And there's education associated with it. There's no question about it. But I'm a firm believer in, trying to show people the way, allowing them to kind of get hands on keyboards and actually experience it in the flesh, where they can start to really see the value from there.
Yeah. Yeah, the one thing that I ran into, so I've seen it with a very large financial services customer of ours, and then I saw it again when I was traveling through Japan just a few weeks ago, which is, if you think about these large enterprises, there was a big outsourcing trend. A lot of them CIOs of these more established traditional companies outsourced their IT. And so what you're left with often is basically just project managers, effectively. And I would say when you're driving a product kind of oriented organizations, it's almost like you're trying to evolve from a project-based organization to a product-based organization. And they're really in that ultimate project mindset. And the funny thing is, in this financial services organization, it was actually the impetus to get Workado. And the funny thing was and again, so bring this all back together, the enterprise architect there basically told me, he said, Markus, I've done this for a long time. I've never been as miserable as right now. And I kind of look at something like Workado as maybe the only chance to get my fingers back on this, to get more involved, to kind of break that cycle of just everything is outsourcing, everything. And she explained how the outsourcing really killed agility. If you think about so this company is in New York, your outsourcer is exactly 12 hours away in India. So you never talk to them. It's just all through documents. Basically, everything that's agility, everything that's startup, everything that's kind of fast pace is basically dead on arrival. And interestingly enough, the same thing was in Japan. I think they were traditionally working pretty much giving everything to system integrators. And they're starting to realize wait a second, we're not, with this model, we can't keep up. This is not, it might be maybe financially very efficient, maybe, but in terms of, supporting the business and being agile, it's like the worst situation you can be in.
Yeah, it's very hard in that scenario to drive business outcomes. Right, if you think about it, and this is why I love the move to product management versus projects. I think you said it very well. We're moving from projects to products. And there's a big difference there. People are like, oh, it sounds kind of similar. Is there really a big difference? But to me, projects are kind of transient, right? There's a start and an end, and then you kind of move on to the next one, right? And that's the way the world is. And certainly if you're outsourcing a lot of your project work, I mean, you get yourself into this sort of tranche, which is just that, right? You outsource the project work, there's a start and end, you move on to the next thing. Products are very different, as you know, right? And product managers are responsible for the ultimate success of that product. It transcends time. It's all, unless you're end-of-lifing a product, in which case it wasn't successful at all. But in most cases, you want the product to be successful. It transcends time. You want it to be around for a long time. It requires care and feeding. You need to articulate, KPIs associated with it. You need that closed loop process that really allows you to ensure you're meeting the objectives and the business objectives of the product, but also of the company in general from an IT perspective. So there's a big difference just in the sort of shift in mindset. The second thing I would say is it's very difficult if you're in that environment where you're essentially outsourcing all of the work to someone else to actually build a sustainable architecture, right? Because at that point in time, it's out with your control. You're looking at distinct portions of work and outsourcing projects. They're kind of widgets or units. And there's really no architecture that's being created, again, that sustains over the course of time. And that to me is the number one job of an IT organization or a business technology organization, is to be that macro architect for the business and the technology that will enable and run the company, right? And if you're essentially outsourcing the work, you have no control over that architecture. It becomes very difficult at that point.
Yeah, no, I think you said it before I could ask it. The same thoughts were going through my mind. It's almost like if you're a very project-oriented IT organization, I think chances are very high, probably architecture isn't the most important thing. But if you have that product orientation, I think you can't do it without architecture. I think that's it. Listen, this is fascinating. We're almost like getting to the end here. I have so many more questions. I want to at least one. I want to address, which is how can we do a podcast in 24 without talking about AI and Gen AI? So last year, I think you were on eWeek and you talked about automation and AI matters, and I think you also said it almost felt like AI was subsuming automation a little bit. Like I was just wondering how you think about this automation and AI. Like, are they two separate things? Is one overlapping with the other? Do they reinforce each other? I'm just curious of your take on that.
Yeah, and as you said, it's kind of funny. No podcast or interview would be complete without copious references to AI. So I'm amazed we've been so restrained to leave it to this point. It's fantastic. I mean, we're a good half an hour or whatever it is in. We haven't even talked about AI yet, but here we are. So that's awesome. But of course, there's been this tidal wave of generative AI over the last 18 months. And actually, as a CIO, a lot of it is kind of like smoke and mirrors, I have to say. People talk about AI and there's like marketing messaging around it. When you actually get into it, there's not that much there. But there's definitely real things that are gold in there, right? It takes you a while to get to the gold. And there's really compelling value that can be driven from that. I think about, Samsara in general. We've been investing in AI since the early days of the company. We actually consider ourselves to be a very AI literate organization. It's been longer than the last 18 months. It's been for several years now. And we use it extensively across the products and the platform. So we've been using sort of more traditional AI like computer vision extensively in our AI dash cameras and things of that nature, and really across our platform to drive insights and value for our customers. The other thing I would say is to do AI well, you really have to have enterprise grade data, right? And so you can think about it almost like a garbage in, garbage out problem. Whereas if you have crappy data, you don't have enterprise grade data, you have quality issues, you don't have the ability to kind of integrate that full picture of your data and your business, you can expect to have crappy outcomes when it comes to AI as you're training these models. You can't expect to have high quality outcomes as a result of this. So to me, data management and your data strategy and AI really go hand in hand for organizations. So we're spending a lot of time we're a big data company, 9 trillion data points on an annual basis. How do we actually bring that together and make sense of it for our customers? AI is certainly a big part of that. And then internally, maybe to your question, we're doing a lot with AI just to drive productivity within the functions and generally productivity for our employees. And we have it in various different aspects of our business, pretty much across each of the functions and the entire business in general. I think about, to your question, does AI subsume automation? I think they're great complements to one another. And I think about, the potential for something like Workado as you weave in, and I don't know this for sure, but I'm sure you're thinking about this, as you weave in AI capabilities, it starts to make the ability to automate some of these workflows smarter. And that's the way I look at it at the end of the day. It's not just about driving efficiency and all of that. It's also about making some of these processes smarter and the ability to automate these processes and workflows smarter. So for example, I'll give you a concrete example of what we're looking at now internally. We're actually experimenting with an AI technology, which is really designed to observe how individuals actually use software within their job roles. And then it automates those tasks, actually learns what they're doing, creates repeatable processes that then can be executed on their behalf. So you think about all those repeatable tasks that go on with an organization. It's great for that. It's fantastic. We're seeing some really great results, almost like the next generation of RPA, but with the big advantage that it can actually adapt to changes in the software's interface. So the look and feel, kind of much like a human would. If you had a new UI released, or there's different visual components that changed around, the software, the AI will actually adapt to that in the same way that a human would kind of relearn and recognize where things had moved to in the interface. So whereas RPA tends to break in those scenarios. So it's a good example of where AI is starting to kind of meld with automation, workflow automation, to really create this much more powerful capability for the business.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's fascinating, and what's happened, or what has happened in, I don't know, roughly a year and a half, and what I think will happen in just the next 2-3 years, I think is incredible. So yeah, look, I mean, we at Workado, as you would imagine, right? So the GitHub Copilot was the first thing. So we have our copilots that make certain things easier. Like, it used to be when Monica did that at Slack and build a new connector to Workado, she actually had to really program, right? Today, you point the Copilot to the API
document. Even I could do it today.
You could do it. You could totally do it. I could do it. So this is the Copilot stuff. The next thing is exactly what you mentioned, which is kind of like, so if you have these workflows, these automations, the Workado recipes, they connect to applications, of course. But what if they connect to an AI service in the middle and really make that process, as you said, smarter? I think there's huge opportunity. We've seen great benefits. The real cool thing is what's called Workado Agentic. And so this one is interesting because I think it brings us back to architecture. The way, I mean, you described, it's actually really interesting what you described, the experiments that you're making. I mean, I would agree that RPA was kind of just like a dumb robot. You taught it. I mean, you basically said, do these steps, but it wasn't thinking. It seems like what you're working on there is like you're having now a robot that has senses that actually, you saw what they did before and so on. What we're trying to do with Workado Agentic is, what if you, instead of describing step-by-step your business processes, what if you actually modeled almost like a digital twin of an employee, like that order management person or the finance operation person? What if you could create a digital twin, with a brain, with an LLM obviously being the brain, and at the same time it inherits the Workado capabilities of, we call them skills, of connecting to different systems. It kind of certain tasks it does, and then you feed it with knowledge, documentation of that kind or something like that, with a RAG architecture. But what if you had these digital twins now, and you could line them up. They would talk to each other, and they can do things in the systems, and you modeled your overall architecture of your business with these digital twins of employees. That's kind of what we're looking for. So anyone who feels like, whoa, this is exciting, I'm personally like super excited about. It's obviously wild. It's kind of unexpected, but I feel this could just be like a huge step forward.
No doubt. And that sounds really compelling. I'd love to see that myself. Sign me up. I'd love to see that. The interesting thing about that is that as I kind of think out, and you described the scenario, and I was talking about the kind of learning bot that we're looking at as well, which kind of plays into a similar space. The interesting thing is almost like taking it to the next level. Once we've achieved that, and that's going to be really compelling and huge value to the business. But then at that point, the AI has amazing knowledge about the processes within your business. And wouldn't it be great if it could come back and actually recommend improvements in efficiency and how you can drive greater value? So it's almost like the next level of intelligence that I can see in the future as well. I mean, it has the data, it understands your processes, it can adapt to changes in those processes. So why not give recommendations around how you can improve those processes as well? So I think that's where we're headed as we start to layer in these, additional advancements in AI.
Yeah, it's exciting. It really is. I mean, it seems like today what's happening is doing all the things that are a nuisance. Like, for example, salespeople having to log their notes in Salesforce. Salespeople hate that stuff. I mean, when you any cop movie you watch on television, right? What do the cops hate? Like doing the report after the crime happened, right? That's, same thing. The salespeople don't like it. I interview a lot of people. Like after every interview, I have to go in and type in my thoughts. It's like, hey, I mean, Jenny, I can totally help with that. You give him the recording, it does a transcript, boom, you're like 80% there. But I think going forward, what you mentioned is like, I think we've yet to seen the next level. Where it actually understands what's going on and says like, hey, wait a second, there is something I think you should do differently. I think that'll be really cool. To finish this off, I heard these like really interesting studies. So one study in a hospital, nobody was harmed. Doctors still made the decisions, but they ran Gen AI on the side. And it actually turns out that statistically Gen AI made better decisions than the doctors.
Right.
All right. And then the one that really got me thinking was Game of Go. It's a pretty complicated Asian, board game, like the Asian chess in a way. And so there they actually fed an LLM, I think all the known Go games in the world, all the sequence that people played. And then as a comparison, they just took two LLMs with no knowledge and just had them play against each other. No previous knowledge, just basically for like a month, it just kept playing and playing and playing. 100 games, they compared these two approaches. The one that played against each other won every single one of the 100.
Yeah.
So I think, this could be, we might get to a point where this is better than what we can do.
Yeah, exactly. That's the slightly scary aspect of all this as well. But I do think that to your point, and all these examples, companies really need, if they're not jumping in already, they need to jump in, right? There's certainly concerns associated with it. There's kind of ethical concerns, there's security concerns and things of that nature, but don't wait. Clearly do your diligence and, try and be consistent with your security posture and all of that, but jump in and experiment, right? That's essentially what we're doing. We've essentially goaled our business technology organization across each of the functions to experiment with technology, create a pipeline of AI technologies, because there's so much going on out there. And the most promising ones we'll bring through and bring it to production, which takes longer. But we've got to create the space for experimentation. It comes back to the growth mindset, in actual fact. I mean, back to the book again. How do we create that culture that, enables and encourages this experimentation? Sure, you're going to fail in some things. You talk about that funnel of innovation, right? You're going to experiment with a lot of AI technologies. And what comes out of the funnel may be a small handful, but there's compelling value there. And that's what we're seeing, certainly at Samsara.
Yeah. Let me echo this one. I completely agree. I think the way I look at it is like, yeah, you can, I mean, it might be scary, but I think the best way to get disrupted is by not do anything. If you're not experimenting right now, I think the chances that you're going to get disrupted are actually really, really high. So it's not just like an appeal to, hey, be brave. I mean, it's kind of like, if you don't do that, you are actually hurting yourself.
Exactly.
Other people who do it, they will outrun you. It's almost a guarantee because the competitive disadvantage is going to be so big. Hey, Stephen, thank you so much for spending the hour here with us. That was fantastic. I hope we're going to talk more over dinner soon.
Yep. Let's do it. Thanks so much, Markus. Good to see you again.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.